Well, the recording is in progress, and so are we. This is Andrew Williams Jr. Thank you for joining us for Conversations with Andrew Williams Jr. Concordian Conversations, which will have a very special edition just to address what the Concordian Conversations are. But today is Juneteenth, and that's June 19th of 2023. We're in Concord, Massachusetts, and we've been celebrating Juneteenth for the last several days, and we're going to continue. Today, we're at a very special place. Formerly, it was called the Concord Reformatory. Now it's called the Massachusetts Correctional Institute at Concord. And this is important for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is because it was in 1947 and 1948, I believe, that Malcolm X was incarcerated here. Here is where he actually learned how to read. And we have other important information we'll share after Stuart gives his introduction of who he is, who the Center for American Studies at Concord is, and why we're here.
Thank you, Andrew. And we also have our guest, Calvin Pearson. And I'm going to be asking Andrew, and if Calvin is so moved, to speak about how the slave farms were the forerunners of our correctional system. It's a very real and tragic story that I think it's important to address. So we have the Center for American Studies. We have done programs with the prison going back to the 1980s, so a century and a millennium ago. One of my close colleagues was a man named Clem Smith, who worked as a psychologist in the prisons. And he developed something called the Shared Leadership Program. And it was because of the Shared Leadership Program that Concord's prison, not much longer after Malcolm was here, that the Concord prison became a national model. That is, in the 1960s, it didn't blow up as many prisons did because they had shared leadership. It was threefold. The leadership was made up of the administration, the staff on the one hand, the prisoners on the other hand, and Concord citizens on the third hand. That is, all key decisions invited input from these three constituencies. It was a threefold approach that distinguished the Concord prison nationally, if not internationally. As I said, that kept it from blowing up during the 1960s. And it wouldn't surprise me, given the ways of the world, which are not only outward or discernible, if Malcolm X, this remarkable individual's life and labors, a chapter of it that was here in the prison, didn't contribute to that. I'm going to read a passage from Malcolm that speaks, I think, to the heart of his genius. But first, I'm going to, after I add another short note that comes to mind, invite Andrew and anybody else who may be moved to speak about Malcolm's time here and the penal system. And that PS I wanted to add, if I didn't elaborate fully enough, in the 1980s, we brought international leaders from many nations into the prison. And they came here, again, these are international leaders as students, because it was the prisoners and the staff and Concord citizens who talked about the national model they developed for shared leadership. So that's what Thoreau meant when he spoke about the village university, and what he meant when he said, it is time we had uncommon schools. It is time we had uncommon schools. That's what our work is. So back to Andrew, if he has some more thoughts to share about Malcolm X and the whole penal system. And again, Calvin has been invited, if the spirit moves him, to offer a word or two as well.
Well, thank you very much, and welcome for joining us, Carmine Gorga. I was very pleased to see you again, almost. since we visited you in Gloucester some time ago. But yes, thank you for joining us here again. We are right outside the, see if I can show you. We're outside the institution that was formerly the Concord Reformatory, but now it is, in fact, a part of the Massachusetts correctional system. And I'll share my screen briefly with you. I think I do have a photo of that you can see. Yeah, so this is the photograph here by the mass.gov. This is where we are. And I do want to also let you know that this is Juneteenth, as I said, but we've been addressing Juneteenth and the fact that it was on June the 15th, June the 19th, 1865, when in Galveston, Texas, this formerly enslaved people whose emancipation had occurred 2 months earlier with the end of the quote Civil War, that were notified in Galveston, Texas. And all those formerly enslaved people in Texas were finally notified that they were in fact quote free. However, as I've said earlier today, that did not include all of the slaves or people who were enslaved in America. There was still over 200,000 that did not get their freedom until December 6th of 1865, when the state where I was born, Georgia, became the 27th to ratify the 13th Amendment. However, let me share my screen again, because there is, in fact, supposedly, well, not supposedly, but let me share with you the facts, and then you can make up your own mind about it. So I can find the right window to open. And thank you for your patience. Earlier today, we actually had an opportunity to share an international platform that was celebrating Juneteenth around the world, particularly in Africa. And in there, they linked it to the June 16th, the Day of the African Child, with the uprising that happened in Soweto that led to finally the dismantling of apartheid. However, if you take a look at my screen, let me just read to you, since you may not be able to see it clearly. Does an exemption clause in the 13th Amendment still permit slavery? That's the question. The year the Civil War ended, the United States amended the Constitution to prohibit slavery and involuntary servitude, but it purposely left in one big loophole for people convicted of crimes. The 13th Amendment, ratified on December 6th of 1865, says neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Scholars, activists, and prisoners have linked that exception clause to the rise of a prison system that incarcerates Black people at more than 5 times the rate of white people and profits off of their unpaid or underpaid labor. What we see after the passage of the 13th Amendment is a couple of different things converging, says Andrea Armstrong, a law professor at Loyola University in New Orleans. First, the 13th Amendment text allows for involuntary servitude where convicted of a crime. At the same time, Black codes in the South created new types of offenses, especially attitudinal offenses, not showing proper respect, those kinds of things. After the Civil War, new offenses like malicious mischief were vague and could be a felony or misdemeanor, depending on the supposed severity of behavior. These laws sent more Black people to prison than ever before. And by the late 19th century, the country experienced its first prison boom. Legal scholar Michelle Alexander writes in her book, The New Jim Crow. After a brief period of progress during the Reconstruction, African Americans found themselves, once again, virtually defenseless, Alexander writes. The criminal justice system was strategically employed to force African Americans back into a system of extreme regression and control, a tactic that would continue to prove successful for generations to come. States put prisoners to work through a practice called convict leasing, whereby white planters and industrialists leased prisoners to work for them. States and private businesses made money doing this, but prisoners didn't. This meant many Black prisoners found themselves living and working on plantations against their will and for no pay decades after the Civil War. Was this slavery by another name? Armstrong argues that the 13th Amendment makes an exception for, quote, involuntary servitude, not, quote, slavery, and that there are important historical and legal distinctions between the two. However, she says no court has formally dealt with this distinction, and many courts have used the two terms interchangeably. In 1861, the Virginia Supreme Court ruled that a convicted person was a slave of the state. So I'm going to allow you to digest that for a moment, and I'm going to shift it back to either Calvin Pearson or to Stuart Sinclair Weeks before I make my next brief presentation on the life of Malcolm X.
Colin? So the question is, who was Malcolm X? Someone who, when he began, the world of reading and writing opened up to him. Something remarkable blossomed. Something rather extraordinary blossomed. I'm not sure that we've yet really done justice to him, who this individual, this brother was. I have a quotation that I want to conclude our conversation with. So Andrew, it looks like has caught a breath. So I'm going to pass the phone back to him once again, and then to wrap us up here where we are. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Stuart Sinclair Weeks. And I'm sharing again with you my screen for a very important update, if you would, or at least I think information that's very important to you who may not be aware of the dangerous threat that Malcolm X posed, not just to the United States of America, but to the world economic order as it existed by the time of his death. And let me briefly reveal to you that the Organization of African American Unity, and I'm drawing this from archives and manuscripts at the New York Public Library, was a Black nationalist organization launched by Malcolm X in 1964. The AAU was a secular institution that sought to unify 22 million non-Muslim African Americans with the people of the African continent. It was modeled after the Organization of African Unity, OAU, a coalition of 53 African nations working to provide a unified political voice for the continent. The collection includes various OAAU and Malcolm X related documents, such as 2 statements issued by Malcolm in Cairo, August 1964. A typed article that Malcolm X reportedly gave to Peter Ballery, editor of the OAA newsletter, Black Clash, at the Hotel Theresa the day before his assassination, and interview transcripts, press releases, and other printed matter. So I urge you to, first of all, understand that the work Malcolm X was doing at the time of his death never stopped, because there are organizations that are right this moment working to connect together the people in the American diaspora with those on the African continent. I, in fact, am a member of one of those organizations called Friends of the African Union. I have been so since December 16th of 2012 as a co-director of the Bermuda Americas Bureau of the Friends of the African Union. I bring that up again to your attention because today, June 19th, is not a day that is happening in a vacuum. It is, in fact, in the final year of what's called the International Decade for People of African Descent that was launched by the United Nations in from 2015 to 2024. So this is a historic event, and we're at a historic place. As I said, the Concord, what was formerly the Concord Reformatory, now on the hands of the Massachusetts Correctional Institute. But Concord is the place where earlier today, the entire, or representatives from the city came out, and they did something also historic. They raised the flag of the Juneteenth alongside, or at least on the same flagpole with the American flag. This was historic. They're planning this as the first annual event, reconciling that event. But let me also, before I transfer it back to Stuart, let you know that this is also the first 10-year implementation plan, or at least the last year of the 10-year implementation plan of the African Union's Agenda 2063. So I'm encouraging our audience, those who have an interest in Juneteenth, not limit your interest to what's happening here in the United States, but understand this has a global impact. And all the things I'm saying to you, they have historical impact much greater than just here in Concord or just here in the United States. Thank you so much. I'm going to pass it back to Stuart Sinclair Weeks.
So friends, I want to give you Malcolm X's words, and I think they're essential. His upbringing was poor, to say the least. He had much adversity, much struggle, and yet he became a shining light. I've said to my children when they're growing up, imagine if there had been 3 Gandhis. Gandhi being the one described, I think it was by General MacArthur, that little man in a loincloth who took on the mightiest empire in the world and won without firing a shot. Imagine if there had been 3 Gandhis. Imagine if there had been 3 Malcolm X's. These are the words that Malcolm leaves us, which I think are very significant. He writes, one moment. There is no better teacher than adversity. Every defeat, every heartbreak, every loss contains its own seed, its own lesson on how to improve your performance next time. If we can indeed live and learn, that is, if we are truly alive. And I want to invite my old friend and colleague, esteemed colleague, Dr. Carmina Gorga, if he cares to offer some words, whether about this quotation or how we can develop an economic system and society that doesn't imprison its citizens, but actually serves their blossoming and unfolding. So I will give these words again from Malcolm X and then Carmina. Carmelo, old friend, if you wish to say anything, you're more than welcome to do so. And then we'll give it back to Andrew to wrap up. So once again, Malcolm's words: there is no better teacher than adversity. Every defeat, every heartbreak, every loss contains its own seed, its own lesson on how to improve your performance next time. Carmelo, any thoughts you care to share with us?
About what?
Any thoughts you care to share with us on those words or anything that comes?
It's a big struggle, and it has to be coordinated, and we should be all on one page in order to really achieve results, but little by little, as usual.
Thank you. Well, we hope that there'll be another time. We trust, Carmina, there'll be another time when you can speak more fully of your work to establish economic rights and responsibilities. We will give you more notice, but thank you very much for joining us, old friend. I'm going to give the phone back, the stream back to Andrew to finish off.
Well, thank you again, Carmine. So great to see you. Give your wife my best. And let me end this extended end by reviewing with you an article that was published in The Guardian last December. There is a movement growing to abolish the U.S. prisons labor system that treats workers as less than human. Hundreds of thousands of incarcerated people work in U.S. prisons as part of their sentences, often without basic protections and for little or no pay. For more than 2 decades, imprisoned in California, Samuel Brown worked for more than a dozen different jobs and was transferred between penitentiaries throughout the state, earning less than $1 per hour. At the beginning of the pandemic, he worked as a healthcare facility worker tasked with disinfecting areas where inmates with COVID had been held. He wanted to quit his job. He had asthma and risked his life, but was told he had no choice. By the time Brown was released in December 2021, he had paid just $3,000 of the more than $37,000 in restitution he owed the state. This is tied directly into the same type of practices from slavery. Brown, who is co-founder of the Anti-Violence, Safety, and Accountability Project, says that's the same practice, the same energy, the same spirit that you see in this prison setting. A person can be on one plantation and then they'll be moved to another plantation. And you'll never see the people who you were with ever again. They can separate you from your wife, separate you from your children, from your family. It's the same way in the modern day carceral setting. More than 150 years after slavery was outlawed in the US, California remains one of dozens of states in the country that allows slavery and indentured servitude as a punishment for a crime in its state constitution, a vestige of the US Constitution's 13th Amendment. In 2021, an estimated 791,500 incarcerated people worked in US prisons as part of their sentences in 2021, often without basic workplace protections and under dangerous working conditions for little or no pay, according to a June report by the American Civil Liberties Union and the University of Chicago Law School's Global Human Rights Clinic. Since 2008, Colorado, Nebraska, and Utah have removed such language from their state constitutions. And in November, voters in 4 states, Alabama, Oregon, Tennessee, and Vermont, approved ballot measures that removed such provisions, bringing the number to 7 states. Next year, the Abolish Slavery National Network, a group of organizers involved in movements across the country to end constitutional provisions allowing slavery and involuntary servitude, anticipates that 22 states will have legislation. Their hope is that as more and more states approve amendments to their state constitutions, so too will Congress and a constitutional convention, removing the language from the US Constitution to eliminate the exception. In 2021, Georgia Representatives Lakina Williams and Oregon Senator Jeff Merkley reintroduced legislation known as the Abolishment Amendment that will close the slavery loophole in the 13th Amendment. Bianca Tylik, Executive Director of Worth Rises, a national group lobbying for a federal constitutional amendment, says that removing the exception for slavery and indentured servitude as a punishment for a crime from the US Constitution would establish that all people, especially people who are incarcerated, are deserving the same humanity and dignity. I'm going to end it there, but as you can see, this reformed slavery, or at least this updated application of the slavery code, impacts not just those of African American descent, but everyone in the entire penal system is now reduced to, in fact, chattel slavery by the failure for the United States, we, the people, to eliminate that loophole in the 13th Amendment. So with that, thank you so much for joining us. And we'd like to invite you to become part of our citizens movement. You don't have to be elected to any post to do what you consider to be the right thing to do and what's good for the country and good for your community and good for your spirit and good for the world.
7 p.m.
And good for love. Please join us again at 7 p.m. If you're registered, come to the same place, or join us on our Facebook live stream at AHIABGA-TV network, where we'll have guest Calvin Pearson and a panel that will be addressing some key issues that Stuart Sinclair will explain to you now before we leave.
Thank you, Andrew, very, very much for all the time and the thought and the important revelations you've brought. Calvin Pearson is the founder of the 1619 Project. He's an historian, and more than an historian, he's a truth teller. He's going to be talking about slavery in America and its roots. And his talk will include the fact that the first Africans who arrived in his hometown, Hampton, were not slaves. They had been captured. But slavery hadn't been officially enacted. They were actually very skilled gentlemen and women who had been captured with great gifts and talents. They weren't sort of the rogues that England sent on the ships to America. They were true gentlemen and gentlewomen of great skill, great ability, and great genius. So we'll talk about the challenges of telling Black history tonight at 7 p.m. at the Wheelhouse in Concord. A warm welcome to one and all.
Thank you so much. And for those that you can see my screen, you can just type in bit.ly/CONCORD-Juneteenth-2023, and you'll be able to register to attend, or you can get more information about Project 1619 Inc. at project1619.org. It will, in fact, be Calvin Pearson, the founder, will be our special guest speaker. And tonight we'll be addressing how to tell the history of our Black brothers and sisters, facts and fictions, lesson learned. There'll be a presentation and panel discussion with not just Calvin Pearson as our special guest speaker, but we'll have key panelists retired General Arnold Gordon Bray, and Rick Murphy. For those of you in Concord, it will be at the Wheelhouse at 33 Bradford Street in Concord, Massachusetts. And with that, we're going to wind up today, and we'll wind up this issue, and we'll see you at 7 o'clock Eastern Time here on Conversations with Andrew Williams Jr., Concordian Conversations.
Okay, thank you.
All right,
Thank you.
so much.
Bye-bye. Bye.